Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think the presentation you saw really reinforces that healthcare is a buyer's beware market. And what we're going to talk about is we've had a discussion on the pharmaceutical side, which is a huge problem, and that's the next frontier. But we're going to focus in on the medical side. And again, when you look at reference pricing, it's a buzzword in the industry. It means something different to everybody. I also think that, as consumers, when we talk about reference pricing, it's really giving you cost pricing data so that when you buy healthcare, you can use the same tools like when you're buying a mortgage, when you're buying a car, the ability to do comparative shopping. And in reference pricing, there's some, what we call first generation products that came out. They were legalistic, adversarial, things of that nature. And so folks, I think when you talk about reference pricing, they really fall into one of two camps. They've heard about the first generation services and the balanced billing and the horror stories and the litigation. And what we're going to talk to you about today is reference pricing version 2.0. Dramatically different model in terms of pricing, structure, objectives, and I think as IOA Re said, it's a way to start now pricing and valuing these transactions in a very transparent manner. Definitely feel free to ask us questions, particularly if we start throwing out acronyms that you're not familiar with. I'm going to cover the high-level introduction, and then I'm going to let Ryan get into the detail of the program. Yes, we're going to go ahead and we'll provide the slides to Connie so that everybody will have this as well as a follow-up as part of it. Just very briefly, HST, founded in 2009. I think when we looked at the market opportunity, we saw a few things. We saw a market distortion. Any functional market, prices go up and down. There's ebbs and flows in pricing. Healthcare, as we can see, prices only move in one direction, which is up. We also saw a huge social inequity, and I think, again, the pharmaceutical industry, is another illustration of some of the inequities in healthcare. But 62% of household bankruptcies are due to medical expenses. So let's talk about it. You work your whole life, you accumulate your assets, you hope to leave something for your family, your kids, your grandkids, and at the time that you're going to use a healthcare system, as you start to age, all of a sudden you start to deal with this pricing. So we're here to correct the market distortion and also to address the social ill. As a company, we're pretty focused on the technology side, bringing transparency, cost, pricing benchmarks, the value for medical services. But now, having said that, in order to deploy the technology, we have to have a host of other functions to fulfill that. So we've got member-provider communications, we have enrollment kits, we have patient advocacy centers to do negotiations for balanced billing and appeals. We have stop-loss partners, a critical piece of reference pricing, because at the end of the day, we can do everything right about reference pricing. We can reduce your claims expense by $20 million, but if you don't have a stop-loss partner that prices and values the reference pricing, again, it's something that you can't sell your clients or implement longer term. Our goal is really to revolutionize the way that we buy healthcare. Again, up until now, we've been essentially blind to all these transactions, and whether it's $70 ultrasound that you're paying $60,000 for, or I think in the case of the pharmaceutical side, it's very similar to Medicare. Medicare, if you're a Medicare recipient and you're over 65, you pay for a procedure and say it's $8,000 under Medicare. Same procedure, same facility. You're 64 years old, you could potentially pay $100,000 for those services. Pharmaceutical works the same way. If you're in the U.S., these pharmaceuticals could cost you tens of thousands. You cross the border over to Canada, it's a couple $1,000s. So again, huge pricing variations in healthcare, and that's what we're really looking to address with reference pricing. Company is founded in 2009. We're based in Irvine, California. Currently, we have our client base is stop-loss carriers, MGUs. We manage some of their high-dollar claims risk, TPAs, trust funds, health plans, and interestingly enough, one of our fastest-growing market segments, hospital systems. Briefly, we're going to talk about the different types of reference pricing programs. I think the most common one is what's known as a Medicare factor equivalent. And we actually price the bulk of our services using the Medicare factor equivalent. That's because the providers are accustomed to Medicare. So when you say we're going to pay you Medicare plus 40, Medicare plus 50%, they know that, okay, we're getting a premium above and beyond, and they understand those numbers quite well. The second model that we're going to talk about is what's known as an RBP health plan. And this is the area where most of our clients are focused on, which is you get rid of the hospital PPO, which is generally the cost driver for healthcare, in addition, obviously, to pharmaceuticals and specialty going forward. You keep a physician PPO in place. So now what you're addressing is all of the high-cost procedures on the physician side, for the most part, low-dollar, high-frequency transactions. And I think we do this for a host of reasons. As you're transitioning from a traditional PPO to a reference pricing program, it's important to minimize the change and the disruption for that population. So when you look at yourself as a consumer of healthcare, your relationship is with the physician. It's not with the hospital, yet the hospitals are driving the cost for the health plan. So keep a physician PPO in place. Don't disrupt that relationship. And the other thing that's important there is that PPO logo's on the ID card, so that when you do go secure services, whether it's a provider or a facility, they see that there is some type of affiliation as part of that. Again, minimize the disruption as part of that process. Actually, and I'll talk about cost plus as well briefly. In services, and particularly children's hospitals, services not traditionally provided under Medicare, we have cost databases, and so we'll switch from a Medicare plus reimbursement to a cost plus arrangement. Procedure-specific reimbursements, I think we've all seen that with models like CalPERS. They started out with knees and hips. They had been assured by Anthem, or our neighbor down the street here, that they had the most favored nation. They had the best contracts. You're not going to do anything better than these Anthem contracts. Well, CalPERS, their back was against the wall. They were in a situation where they had a choice of delivering terrible news to their members, which said, remember that pension that we promised you? We're going to have to cut that back. We can't deliver it. Do you remember those benefits that we promised you as part of your employment? Well, we're going to have to cut those back and deliver it. So with their backs against the wall, CalPERS said, what do we do? What options do we have? And they said, let's go ahead. Let's dip our toe in the water with reference pricing. Started out with knees and hips. Started in 2011. Published their results in Health Affairs in 2013, 20% reduction in terms of claims expense below the PPO contracts. After that success, 2013, they said, let's expand this. Were knees and hips just a fluke as part of the reference pricing, or does it apply to a broader set of procedures? So they expanded the surgical centers, diagnostic testing, so on and so forth, several other procedures in 2013. And again, 2015, published their results in Health Affairs, and they again matched the results that they had previously with knees and hips, about a 20% reduction below the Anthem contract rates. So at that point in time, they said, we think that we're onto something. And by the way, when they're onto something, that also meant that they didn't have to deliver the bad news to their membership in terms of reduced pensions or reduced benefits. The other area, and this is was actually in the 2015 Health Affairs article, CalPERS said, this is great. We've reduced a lot of money. We're going to saved a lot of money, and we're going to continue going in this direction. But really, the value of reference pricing is getting the member involved in these decisions, so that when you have a choice and you're going to go get an MRI, if you go to a facility-based diagnostic imaging, you're in for $3,500, $4,000 for that procedure. You go across the street to a standalone center, it's about a $400 procedure. So again, giving the tools for consumers now to start looking at this information and being able to make informed decisions in terms of how they buy and select their health care. And we're going to talk about our consumer app and some other things that we're rolling out there as well. Any questions thus far? The other thing...
Just for edification, our fastest growing block of business is our RBP health plan, where we keep the digital PPO. We use reference pricing on facilities. Right now, currently, we have 1,000 members on that type of plan. We have experience across the country. We're others that they use competitors, that's fine too. We'll just come to the approach and how we do it a little bit differently. Because like Ed said, our fastest growing block of business is hospitals, believe it or not. So there's a different approach to looking at things, as you'll see in a minute.
Yeah, and I think the other important point there is on that block of 400,000, CalPERS is 1.2 million members. Obviously, they have a significant sample size, but on our 400,000 lives that are doing the RBP health plan, we're at about 20% reduction in fixed cost as well. So whether it's CalPERS published results or it's our book of business, with a high level of confidence, we can state that going from a traditional BUCA, Blues United Cigna PPO, to a reference pricing program, you'll experience about a 20% reduction in fixed cost. The other important point, I think, with reference pricing is not an end point. It's a starting point. Today, for the first time, we have price, we have cost, we have value. You're going to see some of our comparative stats in terms of how we evaluate costs in various geographic markets and things of that nature. But 3 to 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about value-based reimbursements. We're already some discussion briefly on case rates. The ability to merge reference pricing with quality metrics and price that out. And again, I think CalPERS, very progressive organization, has set the standard there. So for instance, when they pay $30,000 for knees and hips, $30,000 is all the CalPERS pays. If there's complications, issues, readmissions, PT, anything associated with that risk is shifted to the provider. And again, that really closes the full circle as it relates to reference pricing, going from just a pricing tool to a purchasing tool and attaching value to those transactions. But more importantly, it starts to shift some of that risk to the providers. So today, your plans have the risk, the carriers have the risk, we have the risk as individuals through increasing deductibles, copays, and things of that nature. Value-based reimbursements, now we're going to start to shift that risk over to the provider, using both the reference price and the quality metrics. I think just very briefly, I'll cover this. I think time was really brought to light the huge pricing variations that we have in healthcare, and in that case illustration, that Chuck alluded to, it was actually an Aetna claim, public information, a New Jersey facility. It was their members, their patients that same day. So again, it just really highlighted the huge pricing variations, and that again, as buyers of healthcare, if you don't have the tools or technology, you know that you're probably at the $60,000 range for that ultrasound versus the $74. So the key is, whether you're using us or whether you're using somebody else, get a hold of some information so that you can make informed decisions as it relates to the value, cost, and price of these services. SEIU, and I think this is, folks say, well, why is, California, kind of the market leader here in reference pricing? Well, I think CalPERS, the second largest health plan in the country, was important, but pretty quickly after that, the unions, the employer groups in California figured out that said, wait a second, if Stanford just cut their knees and hips from $115,000 to $30,000 for CalPERS, what does that mean to us? Because those organizations still have their budgets to meet. I don't have the tools or the expertise that CalPERS has. So you saw groups, SEIU, 100,000 members. They quickly said, if we don't move to reference pricing, we know we're going to be at the cost shift side of this. And so again, what you're seeing on the West Coast and a lot of other markets where reference pricing is becoming very prevalent is the smart money. The folks are basically saying, we may not like reference pricing. We really don't understand it, but we know if we don't do something along those lines, that cost shift is going to take place to our plan, to our funds, or to our individual pockets. And so you're seeing a lot of that taking place. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ryan to go through some of the metrics, the financials, and when we talk about reference pricing, how we do it. Perfect.
So this is an actual PPO claim that came through our platform. I did have a PPO discount, so it came at $88,000. That happened to be roughly 7 times Medicare. Once again, had a PPO discount of 58%. Once again, we always ask our clients, well, what did you get a discount off of? And they look at us and we're like, well, I don't know. I got a 60% discount. Okay, great. Tell me what's it off of? What are other people paying for it? Once again, the plan paid around $37,000 or 3 times Medicare. As you can see, when we go to an RBP, keeping billed charges the same, this plan had reimbursed at 150% of Medicare, or roughly $19,000. So just by moving from a cost-up basis, instead of a top-down, they're able to shave an additional $18,000 off. And that's all we're doing in this scenario, in the sense is we've always gone from this, well, we'll work off of billed charges and we'll give you that discount. Or we're saying, well, no, we want to see what other people are paying for, and we'll work our way up from there. And so that's why we're getting a lot of traction in the marketplace today. As far as our health plans and how that goes, realistically, when we talked about the RBP health plan, that's keeping the PPO physicians in place and having reference pricing for the hospital side of the network itself. So there is no new network. Open access. Think of it that way. You can go wherever you like at that point, but the plan is going to pay based on some type of Medicare Plus, or, as Ed said, if children's facilities will be on a cost-plus basis. So as you can see in this example, we had a PPO. They had claims of roughly about $2.9 million. This was with a large carrier, self-funded group, about 250 employees, I think. They moved to reference-based pricing at 140%, and that dropped down to about $2.5 million. So additional savings of about $376,000. Once again, we're going to save on the claim side. That's not the problem. Now you need the stop-loss carriers to actually take this into account when we are doing this. And that's exactly why we partnered with Iowa Re, is because they could see this fact that, okay, we're operating in a different model than we were yesterday. So as you can see on the stop-loss side, they were paying a total premium of about $791,000. When they switched to RBP, this carrier dropped it down to about $574. So about 28% savings on the stop-loss fixed fees. That is tangible for an employer group. Forget my claims. It's kind of fictitious until you actually see the claims coming through. But when a stop-loss carrier puts numbers against RBP, that's when the rubber meets the road for a lot of employer groups. Once again, I'd say on our block of business, we see about a 15 to 20% reduction below, say, the best in class, say it's Anthem or Blue Cross. That's normally what we see when folks are quoting on a spec side for reference pricing, 15 to 20% below. Ag side, 5 to 10 is normally what we see on our book of business. Depends, obviously, where you are in the country and what the paper is behind you. Once again, we're on a fixed fee. So you can see under the PPO, they're at $15.67. For RBP, it was $10.25. So once again, another fixed cost savings of about $15,000. So in totality for this group is about $609,000 for a 240 life group. So not a bad thing necessarily when you can give that. Because what employers will do, some will keep it all, some will pass it on to the employees by lowering their deductibles, co-pays, things like that. So there is some advantage to that. Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll walk through a slide in just a few seconds, and you'll see the comparison. So we'll absolutely walk through that. What we're trying to do is get to the lowest claims cost at the end of the day. We know there's other folks out there. They do it differently. They charge on a percentage of bill. We think this to be advantageous. We want the fees to accrue back to the employer group. So this is what we think is reasonable on a PEPM basis. Trend. I know a lot of you are familiar with Trend. I know our TPAs are very familiar with Trend. So what we did is we grabbed some information, and they were able to show us exactly what the books of business were doing on their blocks of business. So on a fully insured side, I think we're seeing roughly 10 to 12% trend increases year over year. On a self-funded side, you're seeing roughly 6 to 8, depending. But when you move to reference-based pricing, you started to trend with Medicare at 1 to 2% a year. So when we look at 400,000 and we start working it on the self-funded side, and we get up to the 4th year, all of a sudden you're just under 550,000. So you now have a 32% increase you have to go find money for somewhere. You either eat it as an employer, or you make the employees pick it up with a high deductible plan. So, and I know hospitals aren't big fans of high deductible plans because their odds of collecting on those
not very high. So what do? They have to write it off, and then they have to shift it onto the commercial population. So as you can see on the reference-based pricing, at $400,000, I think by year 4 we end up at $414,000, so $414,000, something that's sustainable and that CFOs and CEOs can manage. They can actually manage what their healthcare cost is going to be, because we've talked to a lot of CFOs and CEOs. Consultants walk in, they've got their budgets, they did everything great, and then the consultant walks in and says, you got a 10% increase. It's like, but we didn't do anything. Oh, no, don't worry. We negotiated it down to 8%, so you're good to go. You know, I just met with a group. We would all know the name in here. They've had 2 years where they had 30% increases back to back. And we came in with reference-based pricing, and we walked through the whole thing. And then they said, no, I think we're good. We're going to stay with our consultant. I wish I had that job where I was able to give those type of increases and people just take them. So it's interesting. You know, our clients are the ones who want to manage risk. My clients are not the ones that want to write checks, don't want any member noise, things like that. So those people that want to do that, then that's what we're going to be seeing.
Charge based on hospital expense?
Medical expenses is what it was looking at. So you can see physicians and hospitals. Correct. No RX. RX would be completely different. So we just hit upon how we charge for our services. You know, once again, we think charging for our services, we're trying to be as transparent as possible to all folks. So once again, we're going to take you through a case study. You can see billed charges of about $13 million on that left-hand side, savings of 9.6. This previous vendor was on a fee of 12% of billed charges. As you can see, $1.6 million to the vendor. Now, there are studies out there by Milliman and other folks that's saying these type of fees pretty much offset the discounts being had. You're better off just staying with a PPO at that point, which is interesting. So keeping that same billed charges and savings the same. Once again, our fee in this case was $750. You can see that the fee was $163,000 for those same services. Once again, 90% differential, I think $1.4 million. Who does that accrue back to? That accrues back to the employer group at the end of the day. And we tell our stop-loss carriers, if you see my competitor, we better not be rated the same. Because, once again, you're not having to fund those. The plan is paying us that PEPM percentage. So that's how it makes sense for us. Now, one of the things that really separates us is not only our approach on how we deal with facilities, but our pre-pricing navigator. This one's been quite interesting. We have our partners actually in this room who actually utilize this. And what this is on elective procedures, we're going to let the facility know up front, 1, this is a reference-based pricing plan, and 2, here's what the plan is going to pay for these services. So we get 3 outcomes when we do this. So 95% of the time, we're not going to hear back from the facility. When the pre-authorization process happens, the letter goes out to that facility, they look at it, they move on. Other times, we are going to hear back from the facility saying, listen, Ryan, Medicare at 140 is not my number. Once again, Medicare at 140 is not our end-all, be-all number. Our plans give us that latitude to move between, say, 140 and 200% of Medicare. We need to be collaborative. That's our whole approach. It needs to be fair for both parties, and that's how we approach it. So I'm not going to draw a line in the sand saying take it or leave it. Let's work together. Let's find a number that works for both parties. So we can get a negotiated agreement at that point. The third option being, I run into a facility and they say, you know what, Ryan, you can go pound sand in your reference-based pricing. All right, fantastic. What we can do is redirect away from that facility. And we've done that several times with some of the folks in here where you can redirect to other facilities that are more willing to accept the reference-based pricing. We do it all the time. And we find once you do it a few times through facilities, all of a sudden it starts to become like, well, why aren't they coming here anymore? Well, we couldn't agree on a price. Here's the other options. Now, with that said, the member absolutely can go to their original facility. Absolutely. We're just giving them alternative options to be able to look at it. But if there's a balanced bill, there is no surprise at that point. So they've been educated. They know what to do. Come to the Patient Advocacy Center. We'll handle on your behalf. That's the whole point of all of this. But we want to be able to give them options. Now, some employer groups, what they'll do is if that member does choose somewhere differently, well, then they'll give them some incentive to be able to do that. So there's all sorts of ways you can kind of roll this out. But this one has been quite a game changer in letting folks know up front instead of really after the fact of what's going on. Because as Ed stated, our fastest growing block of business is hospitals. So believe it or not, hospitals do this for their own employees. And then they look to offer these type of plans out into the marketplace directly, going direct to employer groups instead of having to go through a network. So we're really removing that middleman, and there's all sorts of ways to kind of work with that.
Yeah, if I could just add, this is a pretty dramatic difference because the other folks that are providing reference pricing, 100% of those transactions are after the fact. So care has been rendered, all of a sudden they get that huge cutback on those transactions, nobody's happy, balance billing, litigation, so on and so forth. We do this for all elective procedures, so we knock out over 90% of the admissions up front, and as Brian alluded to, we negotiate, settle before services are rendered, so that surprise is not there on the back end, and that yields less than 2% pushback overall on this RVP health plan model. So pre-service, we price it, have that discussion, and yes, there are some reconciliation, emergent, urgent, and some other transactions on the back end, but very minimal, not adversarial, pre-service model.
What do you do when you don't have, if you're not pre-authorized?
So like an emergency situation, someone goes into one of the hospitals, an emergency, falls out of a tree. It's business as usual. I'm not going to move that patient. They're going to get their services rendered. We're going to fall back to the plan document. Whenever that plan document stating claim is going to be adjudicated, we're going to price it exactly to that plan document states. So Medicare, 140%. Now, if there's any pushback at that point, we're going to handle that in our patient advocacy center. So they'll handle any type of communication going with the facility or with the member at that point. So we kind of become that shield for both the plan and the member going forward. So ACA actually helped us in those causes based on some of the regulations that they did give us related to reference pricing. In regards to emergency situations, you could look at, it was directed for out-of-network, but what ended up happening is they said, okay, so we see what's happening on the out-of-network and inflation. Well, you can use what the in-network rate would have been to use a reimbursement, or you can use a Medicare plus type model.
And I'm sorry, but if you don't come to consensus, what's the step after that?
If we can't come to an agreement, there's all sorts of ways we can work it. We try, like I said, we try to be, our plans set the Medicare at 140. So we know that's not going to be the end-all, be-all for all facilities. Now, we will work with facilities up to our guidelines between the 140 and 200% of Medicare. That's usually our normal guidelines to work within that range. Let's figure out numbers. We have their cost information. We have their Medicare, so we're not picking numbers on averages. But at the end of the day, if a facility just doesn't want to pay, there's all sorts of things we can do where I can rescind the assignment of benefits and I can cut the check directly to the member if I need to. Not something we like to do. At the end of the day, realistically, we want to come to some sort of agreement that works for both parties. But our approach up front with them is to be collaborative. We found that works a lot better than trying to be legalistic up front. So just a different take.
Wait, in your back pocket, it's very widely in state-to-state price gouging laws. Like in Ohio, we have one, but the hospitals seem to never have to do it. I mean, I can't walk into Sport Clips and they charge me $50.
Right.
They charge somebody else 14. But this happens in Ohio, and they're looking at it right now in committees of what actual price gouging is, and seeing how it can be tied to healthcare and bill charges.
Yeah, I think you're starting to see more and more states like New York, for instance, looking at balance billing situations. Texas, California's looking at one.
Balance bills all over this country coming out of the state house.
Exactly. So there's a bunch of them starting to look at it saying, hey, we don't think this is the right way to operate when someone has no control in certain situations. So yeah, absolutely. We definitely see that taking place and actually helping our cause.
I think the more egregious they are and greedy, it'll happen quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's, you know what? You can drive patients away. That's probably the biggest thing you could do. Just make these hospitals compete for the business. As Ed stated, Stanford, that's 110,000, and you have other facilities down at 15, and they pick a midpoint and accept in 30. Well, here's the correlation. The higher the price, the worse the quality. I mean, that's documented in California, hands down. So it's not always the best. So that's how you just redirect away. It's like, all right, you're not going to accept it. Well, we can go elsewhere. And that's how this all works.
And that last step you don't want to take is just cut a check to the member and say, you two fight about it. Look,
Yeah.
You already got the money in the hospital, you got nothing.
Ask them how many times I've done that. I've done it 0. So, yeah, like I said, it's the last step to be able to say, come on, let's really work together. And, there can be alternatives to that.
Ryan, once you have worked with a hospital and they've accepted this, in the future, are they more open to that, or have you gotten pushback after you've negotiated claims, say 6 months into a plan, Have you ever had them come back and say, hey, we're not going to do this anymore at your rates?
I can't say we've had a hospital when they've accepted the reference price at the beginning point. We haven't had them come push back. Where we've had folks push back where they say they were going to write something off and then they didn't. But that was more related to a balance bill. And that's when we go back and we walk through this process again. But never when it's been on that type of situation when they're accepting it. And then all of a sudden someone comes in and is like, oh, well, I don't feel like accepting that anymore. So.
First thing we do have is, after we do 10 transactions with the facility and they know that we're being collaborative and we've got the data, quite often they'll say, just go ahead and send over your proposal and we'll review it. So again, I think that's, if you're treating them with respect, if you're paying them fairly and quickly, and then when we have those negotiations and they know we have the data, send us the recommended price and we'll leave that.
And one of the things why hospitals are buying off on this in certain areas is the reason our TPAs paying within 7 to 10 business days. These facilities aren't having to wait 60 to 120 days, especially if it comes to stop loss. Well, now they're waiting even longer to get their money. The other things we're doing is making the plans more advantageous so they can collect their money, whether it's a $500 deductible or $1,000. So we're moving away from those high deductibles, pulling them down, saying, let's make sure they can collect that money from the patient, because what's happening for their end is their bad debt is rising and they're not collecting. So I spoke with a very large facility out in California, and I know Dave knows this facility very well. And we had a conversation with a consultant in the hospital. And the hospital said $1,500. And we're like, well, what does that mean? They said $1,500. Once a patient owes more than $1,500, their odds of collecting were less than 2%. So once again, and this is a very large facility, we all know, and one of the things that we were thinking is, well, if we can get you those deductibles where they're reasonable and you're collecting and you're not chasing the patients down and you're not having to go do all of that, well, now we're taking you out of the collections game. So we're trying to make it more advantageous for them to be able to collect too at the same time while they're accepting this type of pricing. The approach, I would say that's where we are different from a lot of folks out there. We are not legalistic adversarial. We like to be collaborative with the facilities. Does that mean we're best friends with all of them? No, not by any means. But we, at the end of the day, they need us, we need them. It needs to be fair for both parties, not just one-sided. And right now, that's where the PPO contracts come into place. No auto rights, no right to recourse. I know stop-loss carriers are very familiar with getting these very large dollar claims, and too bad, so sad you have a PPO contract. Not fun stuff to have to deal with when that comes around. Transparency on the payer side, cost up pricing, whether we're doing it tied to Medicare, geo-specific, and prompt pay we talked about the 7 to 10 business days. Make it advantageous for these folks to be able to accept this. Accountability for the providers. Once again, making sure that the reimbursements are acceptable. We do work with facilities where we do have direct contracts with our employer groups where it does make sense. So we have some that are 140, 150. We have others that are 180, 190. So it can all depend and range where we're at and what facilities we are dealing with. Once again, where we see this going is accountable care. I think the fastest thing we see is price and quality, marrying those two together, and we're going to redirect based on care then. And that's what we'll be able to do at that point. Who's going to have the best quality? Who's going to give me the best price? Now the hospitals have to compete for that business. It's no longer this, here we go, this train's coming, we know it's coming. No, now all of a sudden we can redirect that train and push it onto a different track saying, well, this facility's got better outcomes, the readmission rates are lower, and they have experience doing 500 of these cases. So it's going to be really tied to that going forward. Once again, you have to empower the consumer. All of us in this room, I think, are all guilty of it. Once again, we have no idea really what's going on. We just walk in with our ID card. We go, we get our services done, and then we walk out. Well, now we're going to start looking around to say, okay, well, I want to know what they're accepting. What are people paying for this? How good are they at what they do? Just like you would for a mortgage or a car. You wouldn't just buy a car and say, yeah, just send me the bill later. I have no idea what the price is. And 2 weeks later, it's $400,000. Well, I didn't expect that. So now you're trying to bring some transparency up front to the consumer. Always the toughest part. You have to get buy-in from the employers. You have to incentivize them to be able to do that. If you just roll this out and say, yeah, I expect you to participate, not going to happen. So I had a cement company, about 600 employees, and they're in Indiana. And one of the things that they did is made it mandatory for all their employees, had to come to all the open enrollment meetings and understand how all of this works. And I met with the CEO, and that's what he said. And he's like, I want to make sure everybody understands this. So once again, education is very important when doing all of this, when rolling that out. The benefits of RVP, I think we've talked about. We know it's transparent. We have the accountability there. Sustainability, obviously, is the one that we look forward to. I know one of our consultants is very excited. He has this fancy graph that shows this huge dip down using reference-based pricing. He's been using it for 4 years, and he just shows it trending out. And it's a great thing that he walks into other employer groups showing them, saying, here's what I did, for groups doing reference pricing. So it can be used in all different ways. Predictability, obviously now you can budget your medical expenses, whereas before it was just, hold on to your hat. Your consultant's going to come back to you with that increase, and they'll negotiate with the carrier to figure that out. I think where we see this really moving to is employer groups and hospitals working together and more directly. But what that means is the hospital is going to be at risk, and the employer is going to be at risk. That's where we see this going. So they both have skin in the game at this point when it comes to this. How good's your quality? We'll pay for better quality. If it's not so good, well, you shouldn't get a premium price for that. And that's where we see it really being involved, where the two are tying together, and we see a really big uptick going there. Our patient advocacy center, probably our most important piece that everybody loves to talk about. What happens when someone gets a balanced bill? It does happen less than 2% of the time. It does happen, believe it or not. So at the end of the day, what we do is we are there to protect and guide the member. We are going to handle all communications with the providers on the member's behalf or on the plan's behalf. So we're going to do the letters, we're going to place the phone calls, we're going to actually reach out to the members to make sure that they feel comfortable. They can always get a hold of a human being. It's not just somewhere where they just get put in a black box and they need to figure it out themselves. No, not at all. So once again, we're communicating constantly, usually with the TPAs, and then we have to communicate with the consultants as well. So they know exactly who is in that patient advocacy center and what their status is. Communicating with the employer groups and doing that makes our lives a lot easier, instead of Sally Ann just walked in with this bill and I never knew anything about it. So communicating is definitely part of this. Once again, we were dealing with the providers. A lot of them want to understand how we came up with our payments. Where did we pull it from? Did we just make up these numbers? That type of thing. Just so you all know, we are not making up these numbers from a black hat. We're using Medicare. That's our starting point. And then we're looking at their cost information as well. So we're pulling both in, and we want to make sure that they are making money. That's the whole point. I'm not here to give them, $1 above their cost. No, I want to make sure that they make money. Like I said, we need them. They need us. It's this kind of love-hate relationship, but we see it turning where it's a win-win for both, going direct with employer groups. So once again, we're going to handle any type of negotiation or communication with the facility at that point. And then ongoing, once again, members have a way to access either through the Patient Advocacy Center, or they can access through the TPA, who gets us the information directly. So this is just high level. This is, I think Ed's hit upon it. We do negotiations. We replace wrap networks out of network. If you're not doing out of network at a Medicare Plus model, you really need to look into that. It's a no-brainer to be able to happen. The RVP health plan is that turnkey solution that we do have for our TPAs. A lot of them private label, offer their own plans. We're kind of the engine behind the scenes that does all the heavy lifting. The analytics, we do analytics. We have more than enough. Believe it or not, I have an actuarial model that a lot of you stop-loss carriers use, so I can price out very quickly an employer group to say, here's what you did, here's where you could be on a Medicare Plus model. If I have the claims data, then absolutely our larger groups will definitely run, usually 5,000 and over. We'll run a year's worth of claims, and we'll say, here's what you did, here's where you could be, very detailed for them to be able to look at. And then lastly, our consumer app. That's probably one of our most important tolerances that we're putting together for in the next 8 weeks. Will be about finished. And what that's going to do is get the pricing information into the consumer's hands. So they'll have all their plans, pricing. We are going to do RX pricing as well. We do have some partners with that where you can drive certain traffic into. So there's a few things we do have in the works.
How are you handling med flights and the emergency support situations where everything's in network? We got this one fool in there that got in there, he's out of network.
Like out-of-network physicians?
Anesthesiologists.
Yep, absolutely.
You have no control over it.
Yeah, so what of our groups doing now, if they don't have a network in place, is what they'll do is they'll use a Medicare Plus for those. So we can do a Medicare at 120, then anything doesn't hit the network. So everything that hits that physician network, air ambulances, we hit those all day long at Medicare at 120 is usually where we're coming in at.
What's the process? How does that escalate? Get down to risk?
Oh, air ambulances definitely are tough. I will definitely agree with you. But once we start to show them the plan language, well, I didn't see the ID card. Well, here's what the ID card says. Here's how we work, that type of thing. It's been very favorably.
Paragraphs in the plan document do you need for your stuff to outline that? I've heard different stories.
So if we're just doing straight out of network, we really just need to change the payment policy at that point, and we could start tomorrow. If we're going to do a full RBP plan, different story. We're going to be a few pages to make that happen. But we have all that to have you. It's kind of like I said, we have that turnkey for you. So.
Someone told me to pass paragraphs. I don't have time reading that, so I was just.
Oh, it's more than a couple paragraphs, definitely. So it's definitely a little different. Yeah. And then once again, like I said, the consumer app being the biggest one because we need to tie all this together, get the information in the members' hands. And what biggest thing when you're talking with consultants and employer groups, they want a turnkey solution. They don't want to say, okay, stop loss is over here, someone's doing UR here, HST does this, the TPA does this. That is confusing. They just want, here it is. Here's the plan. Here's what we offer. The TPA is the face. They are the go-to. We're seeing a lot of traction when you do it that way. When you break it out a little bit differently, messaging when it's coming to that employer group. And that's all I've got. That's all I've got from PowerPoints and all that fun stuff. So hopefully we weren't too quick. But if you have any questions, feel free to touch base with Ed and I. We can dive into all the details.
Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing with medical tourism, especially with the pharmacy, specialty drugs?
I'll take that one. Medical tourism actually ties into that. That is part of the plan language that we do recommend for our clients. So in a situation, actually we just had in Chicago at $280,000 for a particular procedure. They didn't want to accept the reference price. Organization we worked with, got it in Orange County, put them up, near the ocean, flew the family out there, $87,000 all in. The plan actually gave the family a $10,000 basically payment for the inconvenience of going from Chicago to Newport Beach. So you can have huge pricing variations, but if you're not willing to pull the trigger that says we're going to move this high cost patient from this, you're not going to accept the reference price. We're going to shop country. Obviously we start geographically as close as we possibly can to that facility. But if we can't find something in the facility, why not send them to that nice place? Actually, in this case, the kids were at Disneyland while the father was recovering. But again, you're talking about almost a $200,000 differential just to move them to an alternate facility that would accept the reference price. On the pharmaceutical side, we haven't had clients who have done the international medical tourism, but the folks that we're talking about with on the specialty pharmaceutical, that's exactly what they're looking at. But, the family's facing tens of thousands per month, and their combined annualized income is $100,000, and they want to live. Some folks have gone over to Canada, and actually, the individual who has pharmaceutical needs goes there, and they go from tens of thousands a month to a couple thousand a month. So dramatic difference. Definitely impacts the family life. These folks have done it, but I think as specialty continues to grow, we're looking to do a cost plus on the pharmaceutical side as well, and the pilot demonstration program that we've done on the specialty side is 20 to 50% less than the big three. But I think for reference pricing, the domestic medical tourism definitely is an option that should be looked at.
And then, we also saw the Factor 8. We're all familiar with those claims. Where do you think that's going to get impacted? That's coming through a facility bill. Who do you think is going to impact it? Reference-based pricing. Once again, you're going to be operating from that bottom up. So just remember that. So it's going to be a little different for you in those situations. And like I said, we've seen very large claims come through, and we've cut them back to very nominal. So there's a lot of examples for that.
The old argument of freestanding testing facilities versus in-hospital testing facilities, do you see that? How does that reference pricing break out?
Like surgery centers and things like that?
Just if I get an MRI at the hospital versus going at the
Sure.
standalone.
So you can go to the hospital. You can go get the $2,500 MRI. Once again, we're going to cut it back. It's going to be that $350 to $400 for that MRI. Now you can waive all of that and go do it at a freestanding at a $350 to $400 rate right up front, and then there's no potential for that balance billing. So that would be one of the caveats. We do have partners that's what they specialize in, is that MRI radiology aspect of it. Any other questions? All right, well, I appreciate everybody's time.